Well, Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol is one of the most famous works related to Christmas and kind of Western literature. And if you're unfamiliar with the story, it tells of a man named Ebenezer Scrooge, who is a miserly, grumpy old man who despises Christmas and all resents and aims to take that out on people, whether they want to be part of that or not. And after the death of his business partner, Jacob Marley visits him as a ghost and tells him that he's going to, on Christmas Eve, be visited by three ghosts who are going to show him himself. They're going to show him the past, they're going to show him the present, they're going to show him the future. Thus, their name's not that clever: the ghosts of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghosts of Christmas yet to come. And in seeing himself and in seeing the ways in which his behavior has impacted other people, Ebenezer Scrooge has this dramatic turnaround where he commits himself to honor Christmas and cherish it all the year. And what we're going to try to do over the course of the next couple of weeks is go on a similar journey. Advent is not a fancy way to say Christmas. It's not the Starbucks version of Christmas. Right? It's not a rebrand of Christmas even. It is a distinctive season aiming to point to the things that you celebrate at Christmas. So maybe thought of differently, it's a preparation for the things. It says, you're not going to find in the Bible in 1 Corinthians, Paul giving letters to the Corinthian church of, well, you light the purple candle, and then you sing 3 songs, and then you do a liturgy, like that's orderly worship for it's not that, but it is a biblical concept. The concept that is ripe through all of the scriptures, which is that hope, when it arrives, does so in the context of waiting and hopelessness and difficulty and tough circumstances. And much like here in Baltimore on a windy, cold day, you have to fight to keep that candle warm and alive and moving near it, acknowledging that reality as it relates to our own story. You may not have been haunted the way that Ebenezer Scrooge was haunted. But I do believe that the ghost of Christmas past is something that haunts you. Said differently, there's things that live rent-free in your head. Things that you've given power to, things that happened to you, but the way that you've carried them, the way that you've processed them, make it difficult for you to experience the reality of hope or the feeling of hope because the context of the thing that keeps speaking to you about you. So what do we do when the ghosts of Christmas past speak to us louder than the voices of hope? And today we want to look at 2 ghosts, I think, of the ghosts of Christmas past: the ghost of scandal and the ghost of silence, and how these 2 things may be addressed through the lens of Advent hope, and how it may disrupt our status quo today. So again, I said it earlier, it's important for you, according to Matthew in his gospel, to know that Christmas isn't just an isolated nativity set. It's not, we used to do this thing back in the day where we would buy CDs. An artist would make music, put it all into one disc, and we would put it into a player. Yes? Remember those days? Did you ever have one that you bought it, you loved this one song, and everything else was lame? I mean, everything else was terrible. And you know, there's some of us that would look at Christmas that way. Like, we know that there's this story in the Bible that's sort of the reason for the season and why people get cantankerous when we say happy holidays and things of that nature. But what Matthew wants you to know is that the story of Christmas doesn't begin at a nativity scene. It begins generations before in the story arc of the fall of mankind, but the redemption of mankind through the one who is going to come and be this rescuer. So the Gospel of Matthew and Matthew's version of the Christmas story begins with a genealogy. And you can suck the air out of the room already, right? Like, oh, good. We're going to read a genealogy today. You know, I was thinking, how could I go to work tomorrow and have hope in a difficult environment and deal with toxic people and speak to my difficult situation? A genealogy will do it. Thanks so much, Scott. In fact, this is some of the reasons why, isn't it? A lot of us dismiss the Bible, blow it off. Oh, good. So-and-so begat such and such. Names I don't care about, names I won't remember. Thank you very much. Amen. Matthew wants you to get something very important by the names he's going to drop into this story. And I think if you can embrace it, you can enter the weirdness of trying to relate to a genealogy, what you might find is that Matthew has given us a way to deal with the ghosts of Christmas past. Matthew begins his genealogy in chapter 1, verse 1. This is the opening words of Matthew. This is the beginning of what will be the Christmas story. And by chapter 2, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Two famous names in Jewish lore, but two scandalous people in their own right. They're people of great faith. They're people that are commended for their faith. But if you know anything about their story, they are not perfect people. They are messy people. They're people, actually, if you read their narratives, you're going to get in the middle of and be like, wait, what? That guy did what? That man after God's own heart did what? Yeah, that's part of the story. There's already the skeletons in the closet being opened up. But it goes deeper than that. Matthew, I'm not going to read all 16 verses of the genealogy, but I'm going to highlight some names to you here in verse 3, 5, 6, and 16. And see if you notice anything that may be strange from these verses. Verse 3, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Salmon, the mother of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. In 2024, it probably makes a lot of sense to most of us that moms get some credit, right? Like, let's be real. Like, if we're talking genealogies and keeping the things going, we can't do that without the moms. They should probably get a little bit of love. But if you're in a patriarchal society and you're trying to paint yourself or paint somebody as the chosen one, a la Dune or the Skywalkers or the one who has come to fulfill the prophecy, the one who is going to make things right, you don't care about the moms in the first century. You care about the dads. You try to attach yourself. You like the way you might try to endear yourself at a Christmas party. One time I saw Wayne Brady on the streets of Cincinnati. It's true, I did. One time I saw Queen Latifah walk out of Lush in Baltimore. I did. Aren't you interested in what else I have to say? Like, this is like it. Like, you try to attach yourself to those stories that make you endearing and winsome and fun. That's not what Matthew does. Matthew highlights women. And there are more than 5 women in the 42 generations that are mentioned here, but these 5 women all share a commonality. They would be known through their history as being ritually unclean. If they're Jewish, there's scandal attached to them. If they're non-Jewish, it's even more scandalous. But it's the kind of story that you don't hear about till you get to Thanksgiving and your uncle has a little too many. And the Cowboys game just isn't holding the attention. Right? Like Matthew brings to light the things that families try to stamp out. He talks about Tamar, who survives an incestuous relationship, but acts boldly on her behalf to secure her place in God's plan. It's a weird story in the book of Genesis. He talks about Rahab, a former prostitute, who is known for helping the Israelites, though she is not one. He mentions Ruth, the Moabite widow, who is redeemed by Boaz. He mentions Uriah's wife, who is Bathsheba, and the name here, Uriah's wife, and not saying her name, is not intended to shame her. It's intended to shame one of the first guys I told you about, David, who dismissed himself of the responsibilities of leadership, sat on a roof, watched a woman bathe, not knowing that she was being watched, and then when his lusts consumed him, arranged a rendezvous so he could exploit her and leverage his power over her. And upon impregnating her, decided to cover up the scandal. Rather than admit fault and to try and make things right, he has her husband brought home from war, feigns a conjugal visit, and then sends him to the front lines to be killed. Then there's Mary, who is running around town with a baby bump saying it's the Holy Spirit's baby. Matthew wants you to see something, which is the parts of the family tree that often get pushed into the corner, get said, shh, don't talk about that, are the things he's moving to the surface. Herod the Great was said to have found out that he was a mudblood, that he was not purely Jewish. And when his fact checkers and his people kind of did all the Ancestry.com stuff, he threw a fit and destroyed all known evidence of any kind of lack of pure blood in the Jewish line and relied on a culture and reputation of celebrity to carry on the story that he was, in fact, the chosen one. We'll talk about Herod in week 3. There's a distinction here between what Matthew is doing and what often happens when we're bolstering our resume and trying to paint ourselves in a pretty picture. But why? Why would Matthew do this? Well, in part because it is Jesus' family. But in another sense, because this is the kind of king Jesus is. The ghosts of scandal say, cover it up, hide it, make it go away. Nobody will ever have to know. And Matthew brings it into the light to say, this is the kind of king, this is the kind of king you're going to serve. One that doesn't hide the scandal, but comes from the scandal, condescends to the scandal, says, this is who my kingdom is for. Why does this matter? Well, I think it matters for 2 reasons. One, because of the things that have happened to you, and because of the things that you have done. To come to a place, and we all will wrestle with in some way, right? This is so easy to say into a microphone and so hard to live. That you are not the things that you are begging the world to not find out about you. And that you are trying so hard to get past. Joseph, the Old Testament character in Genesis 50, is a brat most of his life. At his young age, his brothers pay that forward to him, mistreat him horribly. And every time you read Joseph's story and you think it's going to turn to a positive, something terrible happens in his story. And when Genesis 50 rolls around, Joseph is now in a place of stature and position where he has the ability to sort of swing back at the people that have swung at him. His brothers, who have ruptured the family, who have devastated the relationships around him, who have created years of trauma in his story, and is able to look at them and say, what you intended for harm, God has used for good, including the saving of many lives. I don't tell you this to say that, well, just trust in Jesus and it all works out. But to speak to, that is the kind of king Matthew is saying has arrived in our midst. The one who has the power to reframe the things that have happened around us and the things that have happened to us that weren't of our choosing, to help us carry differently the traumas and travails of our story. But also, and can you imagine, right? It's kind of a trope now. We've also, most of us have seen various versions of A Christmas Carol a number of times. The Muppets is the best one. Don't at me. The Muppet Christmas Carol, if you haven't seen it, that's what you need to do this afternoon at 4:25. Don't watch the Ravens. Watch that. You got to see that one. It's so good. It's kind of a trope for us now, right? There's the Ghost of Christmas, but just think for a minute. Having to go back to a moment where you have behaved foolishly or embarrassingly, and you know that you've hurt someone, and you have to see it. The truth is, some of us do this every day, don't we? The voice of shame speaking in our ear about us. It's not that you did something wrong. It's that you are something wrong. It's that there's no hope for you. It's the always. You're always going to be this. You are never going to be this. Why does Matthew begin with a genealogy? Because of Hebrews chapter 2, verse 11, to say that the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Jesus isn't ashamed to sit at the table with you. Some of us didn't travel to see people because we are ashamed of what would have come up over turkey and pumpkin pie. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, by the way. Boundaries are good. But what I'm saying is, in the spaces where you may be among the disqualified, Jesus is moving toward you. That the scandal in your life doesn't have to perpetuate itself in ways that create further self-destruction. That differentiation is possible, reframing is possible, that weaving these stories into a larger purpose is in fact possible. But it's not just that. When we get to verse 17, there's more to the story. Matthew tells us that there are 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile of Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. Now, if you're a historian, you go, well, that's 42 generations for the span of human history. Come on, man. You're not going to ask me to believe it. So, there you go again. You gave me a genealogy, and now you're giving me numbers that don't add up to the whole of a human experience. Matthew is not being literal, he's being literary. He's trying to show you something. He's going to show you something that I think we'll get to in just a minute. But when we get to that last 14, the exile to the Messiah, that is actually a time we talk a lot about at the Foundry. We do lots of sermons about kind of the time in exile and things of that nature. You might know that from the book of Daniel. You might know that from the book of Jeremiah. You might know it from the book of Nehemiah, where everyone comes back and there's a great rebuild after the Israelites have returned from their captivity. The first 12 chapters of Nehemiah are this brilliant leadership story, this come together, and then Nehemiah 13 tells us what happens in the human span of history, which is that something that probably happens in your story too, where everyone's doing great for a little while and then it all just falls off and we go back to where we started. And that's what happened for the Israelites returning from this time of exile. We're going to be great again. We're going to get back at it. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to make it great. We're going to trust the right people. We're going to do the right things. And for a little bit of time, it flies. But then Malachi comes along and says, here you are again. Putting your trust in things that you couldn't put, that just can't bear the weight of your trust. Putting your trust in people, believing in your own ability to do the right thing when you in fact never do the right things. So the book of Malachi says there's going to be one who's going to come and make this right. There's going to be one who's going to set this right. He's going to endear us and draw us back in as God's people. Malachi chapter 4, the final words of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, in the way we often read them, is promising this day of the Lord that's going to come and restore like all of the nonsense and the scandal, similar to the scandals that we've mentioned up to this point. Malachi ends, and before Matthew begins, there's 400 years. There's 400 years in that last generation that we're talking about here. 400 years. I mean, if I just told you, hey, I found this note on the ground, it's dated 16 to 20. It's a savings bond from 1624. Take it to PNC and let's see if they'll cash it. Maybe M&T. They've got a hometown vibe. You're for the little man, right? I see your name on the stadium. I mean, it would be foolish for us, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to do, right? There's been 400 years of silence when Matthew says, the king has come. What do a lot of us do with the silence? We run from it. We evade it. We fill it. We turn up the noise. That's what Israel's done. Israel has believed in misinformation and disinformation. Israel has lived in denial. Israel has turned to their vices. Israel has said, we're not going to repeat the past failures. We're not going to be what our fathers were, and then they do the same thing their fathers do. They become bitter and cynical. So this hope breaking through, this pronouncement that hope has arrived, comes in the midst of the ghosts of silence, where we either feel a deep abandonment or we spend a lot of time trying to fill the spaces where we feel that abandonment. And Matthew is trying to turn our attention to something that he says can break the cycle. Remember I told you there was a literary device being used here. This is a little bit weird, and it's you're gonna, if you've ever seen the "It's Sunny in Philadelphia" meme, where there's like all the yarn pieces like connecting. It may feel a little bit like this to you, but bear with me for a moment. There have been 6 sevens. 6 times 7 is 42. The 7th 7 would lead us to 49, the present age that Matthew is going to usher in now with Mary, speaking about the nativity story, the things that you will begin to associate with the nativity in the next couple of weeks, and we will talk about from the book of Matthew, is this next age. It is the 7th 7. We are in the 49th year at that point in time. If you are scholared in the ways of Mosaic law, that takes you to Leviticus 25, which is the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee said that every 50th year in Israel's history, the debts are canceled. The people who are in power relinquish their power and send and reassess all of that wealth to the people who have been exploited by that wealth. And that there's a great reordering of things that's supposed to take place here. Sounds really good, doesn't it? Sounds really complicated. In fact, I can remember a couple of years ago someone suggesting that, and the comments being all rooted in my brain is breaking thinking about how you ever practice something like that. Well, the good news for you is that you're not alone. Israel you can find no evidence in any kind of Jewish history that the Jubilee year was ever celebrated. Why? Because people in power don't give up the ring of power. and particularly when it elevates people that they've been exploiting for their benefit. And let's just be honest, it's really flippin' complicated to reorder a bunch of things, right? Try to get lines painted on a road in Baltimore. It's complicated to change a structure when you live in a place of we've always done it this way before. So something breaking through. and disrupting the ways in which we felt the abandonment or the ways in which we've tried to dial it out is huge and massive for us. And that's what Matthew is trying to point us to. The one who has the ability to actually usher in the Jubilee has come. And he's not hiding his scandal. He comes from the scandal. He condescends to the scandal. He has the ability to bring freedom and restoration where there has been exploitation. He has the ability to bring down the people who puff their chests with their own righteousness. We can confront the ghosts of Christmas past with Advent hope. But Rabbi Foreman asks this question. It leads us to this question, rather. Will we dream about a new tomorrow, or will we continue to lie to ourselves about a better past? The ghosts of Christmas past, like in their most optimistic form, right? Either like that's kind of what they do. We have to lie or adopt some kind of narrative that keeps us on the pathway to survival, or we just dismiss the thing entirely. Advent hope calls us to say, can the Messiah bring forth this new tomorrow? This is really about holding space. It's kind of been a meme this past week. I don't know if you've seen it, to hold space. But it's not a meme to hold space for the follower of Jesus. The follower of Jesus is committed to holding space, to creating margin with our head, our heart, and our hands to deal with the ghosts of Christmas past, or even just accepting our present reality. Tish Harrison Warren, in her book Prayer in the Night, talks about that, then leading us to have to process the reality of grief. I want to share with you her words. She says, unless we make space for grief, we cannot know the depths of the love of God, the healings God wrings from pain, the way grieving yields wisdom, comfort, even joy. If we do not make time for grief, it will not simply disappear. Grief is stubborn. It will make itself heard, or we will die trying to silence it. If we don't face it directly, it comes out sideways in ways that are not recognizable as grief. Explosive anger, uncontrollable anxiety, compulsive shallowness, brooding, bitterness, unchecked addiction. Grief is a ghost that can't be put to rest until its purpose has been fulfilled. And do you see any of those things in your story? Explosive anger, uncontrollable anxiety, compulsive shallowness, brooding, bitterness, unchecked addiction. What will we do when the ghost of Christmas past is haunting us? What Scrooge tries to do early in the story are three things. He demands to be shown no more. And it's what a lot of us will do. We'll live in denial. I don't want to see this. I don't want to think about it. We'll ask to be taken away. He asks then for it to be taken away. A lot of us will bargain. God, if you'll do this, then I'll do this. And then he honestly just tries to take things into his own hands. He steals the hat of the ghost of Christmas past, and he tries to snuff out the lamp. Denial, bargaining, attempt at control is how a lot of us have framed the ghosts of Christmas past. But Advent hope says, how can we walk in the realities of what's in front of us? What realities need to be confronted? And rather than asking it all to be taken away, what narratives need to be rejected or reframed? Maybe they served us for a season. Maybe they helped us survive a difficult upbringing, but they're not serving us now. In fact, they're weighing us down. They're haunting us. Rather than trying to grasp at control, where do I just need to admit that I have some agency? I can't control everything, but I can, in as much as it's up to me, be a reconciler in a time where reconciliation is talked about but not often pursued. Communion is a place for us to hold space for these things. It's not a rush to Christmas to say, well, the good news, guys, is that Jesus just makes it all good. And he's got it. Woo! But to say, as you live in the tension of the ghosts of your past, as you are struggling with your own sense of denial, as you're struggling with your own bargaining, as you're struggling to grasp at control where in fact you need to let go, that the God of the universe is walking with you. And that the God of the universe is in the business of drawing near people like you. There can be a lot of frustration to gather in a room that was built in 1890. There can be massive capital repairs that need to be done. There can be Sundays on a holiday weekend where the boiler isn't working properly and the building is heating unevenly. But let me tell you one of the beautiful things about meeting in a building built in 1890. The seats that you're sitting in have been featured with people who have prayed prayers you likely are praying today, who have sent children to war, who have wanted to see relationships restored, who have felt the sting of loneliness and being far from family. And I don't say that to say, shut up and get over it, and why are we even reacting? But to say, well, one of the things we do in communion as we hold space for God to meet us in our story is that we acknowledge that this journey is a universal one that God's people have experienced. And so we do not do it alone. And so part of what we do in communion is certainly try to give you some space to be alone with God in the context of the mess of your story. And the places where you're trying to say, God, what can you do with the ghosts of my past? But we get her up and we get around the room and we move around the room as a reminder that we're not doing this alone. And that's good news. That God is weaving together a story of other people who are seeing their past and their struggles woven into a bigger story. And so we invite you to receive communion this morning so that you might hold space for those realities, for those narratives, for those places where you're trying to control. There's 4 stations in the room. They're all gluten-free if you want to receive bread and cup and take it back to your seat. And we'll continue to invite the hope of Jesus into the places where the voices of the past feel haunting. Let me pray for you as you do this. God, I will just confess before you in a community of people that sometimes you can say a thing into a microphone that you yourself struggle to receive. And I'm certainly not the only one that can speak of hope, but struggle to really feel it in the difficult, messy parts of my story. Lord, we bring those things toward your light in a time where we fill the noise and we bury the scandal. Meet us in that place. In the name of Jesus. Amen.